did not know Daniel like his successor, or like his predecessor, who had declared that God was the one true God and preserved the Jewish people and gave them the right to establish synagogues wherever they were throughout the Babylonian Empire. But this one, this nephew, it might have been his grandson, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that anybody is. In any event, who knew Daniel not, who knew not the fear of the Lord, became so self-obsessed, self-possessed, so prideful that he pulled those temple accoutrements out so that he could set them down in front of his satraps, his rulers, who he brought in from all over. Now, he thought that he had peace and prosperity, and that he was so secure that he could afford to bring all those rulers together for a celebration. But while that was happening, nobody was home mending the fences and tending the borders. And so, as it turns out, whenever Daniel executed his prophecy, remember the handwriting on the wall, the disembodied hand writing on the wall, saying that you've been weighed and measured and found wanting, and this night your life shall be forfeited. And it wasn't too long after that, no sooner had the words, whether they were serious or not, of the king that exalted Daniel for his vision been spoken, then he turns around and Darius the Mede is standing there, an invader. The first indication that he has that he's being invaded is he's standing before the man who will take his life. That's God's judgment. Therefore, all hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt. So quick and so rapid was it that the Medo-Persians met with virtually no resistance as they overtook Babylon and literally absorbed their entire empire. Verse 8. Someone can start there for me and just go through 12, verse 12 for me, please.
And they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces will be like flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate. And he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and will lay hold the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, a man more than the golden wedge of Ophir.
Even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir, the gold of Ophir. A good man, being more precious than a fine gold. Good men, righteous men would be few in number. Those men would be laid low of the Babylonians. He's talking about the fact that good, noble men in Babylon would be scarce and hard to find. So we look at the pangs and sorrows in verse 8 that shall take hold of them and shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. How quickly labor pains will come upon a woman whose time is due. Pretty typically at the most inopportune moment. And they shall be amazed at one another. Their faces shall be as flames. Faces red with embarrassment at their lack of concern, at their carelessness, at their lack of attention to detail. Again, he's talking about Babylon being caught totally unawares. The day of the Lord cometh cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy what's the word he uses here? He shall destroy the what? Sinners thereof out of it. Who's he talking about? Is he talking about heathens? Is he talking about Babylonians? Is he talking about those who don't worship the one true God? If that's the case, then how can they be sinners if they're not amenable to God's law? Isn't that a strong implication here that all of us, whether we want to be or not, are amenable to God's law in one way or another? We shall all stand in judgment. Best we be prepared. There's an example here. There's an image here. There's an image here that Christ talked about when he talked about the wedding party and how the maidens were not prepared, and how the vigil was not properly kept when the master came home. The stars of heaven and the constellations shall not give their light. Now that's an apocalyptic language. It did not turn dark. But what he's referring to is the fact that the stars of heaven and constellations, those people to whom Babylon looked for guidance, would be taken away from them and would be silent. They'd be basically an aimless, wandering people with no one to give them direction as to what they should do. A leader, a team without a leader, a team without a captain, a team without a coach. A religion whose God has been stripped away from them. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth. The moon shall not cause her light to shine. There was no response that Babylon could muster against the incoming armies of the Medo-Persians because they had not been prepared. All of the known world, Babylon, they thought that they controlled the whole world, and so they did not pay any attention to what was going on among the Medo-Persians during that period of time. I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity, their sin. Cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible, those who think that they are so much more powerful. Remember how Babylon overwhelmed Israel. Remember how they overwhelmed the nations around themselves. Remember how they thereby developed such a high opinion of themselves that they then cease to be vigilant. You know, there's always a bigger fish to gobble up one. Big fish gobbling up. I don't know if you remember that. I saw some sort of an image where there's a minnow and a fish gobbling, and a bigger fish gobbling, and a bigger fish about to gobble that one up. There's always someone bigger and better and tougher and meaner than you are out there. I will make a man more precious than fine gold. Royalty was stripped away from them, even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir. Shaking the heavens, heaven and earth will shake. Removing her out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts and in the day of his fierce anger. It's amazing. What was it? What was said? It is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And it would be interesting to wonder what thoughts went through the Babylonian king's mind that day when he had judgment pronounced upon him, and it was executed immediately. So let's go verse 14 through 22. Someone could read that for me, please. Again, continuing the travail of the Babylonians.
Left off at 13.
13. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, we can start there at 13. That's fine. I think I kind of snuck into that a little bit as I was doing it. But go ahead. Right there's a good place.
Therefore, I will shake the heavens the earth shall be removed out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. And it shall be as a chased road, and as a sheep that no man taketh up, that shall every man turn to his own people, and flee every one into his own land. Every one that is found shall be thrust through, and every one that is joined unto them shall fall by the sword. Their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses shall be spoiled, and their wives ravaged. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash their young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. But wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. And the wild beasts of the islands shall cry in their desolate houses, and dragons in their pleasant palaces, and her time is near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged.
Okay, so he's talking about things like the jackals, jackals who are living, making their homes in what used to be the homes of those people who lived in the city of Babylon. And I note that Babylon was destroyed. The downfall was so great that even the library collapsed on top of many of their works of literature, which now reside in many of the great museums. In many cases, much of that work is sitting in basements of museums, yet to be worked on and transcribed and deciphered. And Babylon was in fact destroyed and was never restored to its greatness. Remember, that's exactly how they subdued Babylon in the first place. Was they utterly destroyed the city, and people fled. And if they did not outrun the invading army, the Babylonians were put to death. Wild beasts, houses full of sad creatures, owls that dwell there, wild goats. A satyr is a wild goat that would dance on the rubble like a billy goat dances on a rock of a hillside. A hissing, a place where people would say there's bad things that have happened here. The Arabians, the nomads wouldn't even want to pitch their tents there. Well, for a number of reasons. One is a lot of bad vibes. The other is that because of the rubble, there would be no level place for them to pitch a tent. The glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, nothing like it in the entire Mesopotamian valley, from the Sea of Arabia all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. It was the jewel. Destroyed utterly, never to be rebuilt. Now, I note that Saddam Hussein sought to rebuild Babylon. His success in that regard was only limited. So there's an image of desolation here, an image of God's justice, God's terrible justice being carried out on these people. Behold, the goodness and severity of the Lord. It amazes me that anyone could look at the nature of God's justice and judgment, and particularly in regard to the Old Testament, and indeed in regard to Christ's prophecy with regard to the destruction of Jerusalem under the Romans and not see that God's wrath is inescapable for the unjust. But then he talks about the children of Judah. And words of comfort again, and words of, remember that Israel, even in the invasion, that Israel was spared much of the invading army's wrath, being preserved for that time when Cyrus would send that remnant back. So let's start with chapter 14, and we'll go through. Someone read the first 5 verses of chapter 14 for me, please.
The Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will still choose Israel and settle them in their own land. The strangers will be joined with them, and they will cling to the house of Jacob. Then people will take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel will possess them for servants and maids in the land of the Lord. And they will take them captive, whose captives they were, and rule over their oppressors. It shall come to pass in the day the Lord gives you rest from your sorrow and from your fear and the hard bondage in which you were made to serve, that you will take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how the oppressor has seized the golden city seized. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers.
Okay, so there's a prophecy there again. There's a rejoicing, I should say, an exultation by the Jewish people at the downfall of the Babylonians here, that they're being saved. I note as I jump back just a little bit to verse 17, that again, God through Isaiah has told them who their deliverer will be. They talk about the Medes. Will stir up the Medes against them. Darius the Mede, which shall not regard silver as for gold. They shall not delight in it. They're not interested in profit. They got everything they need. They want conquest. There was a reason for that. There's a blood feud going on between some of the royalty there. And I'll tell that story. I'll relate those events at a later date. But the people shall bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids, and shall take them captives. The tide will turn. These Babylonians who had oppressed the Jews, even the Jews that remained in the land, will be regarded with more esteem than they are. They will be relegated to the same position of servants which they subjugated to, in which they subjugated the children of Israel in their exile. So even those, and because of the favor that the children of Israel were given under the Medes, under the Medo-Persians, and they were for the most part pretty happy to stay where they were when it came time for the call to return to Judea, to return to Judah, and to rebuild Judea, or rebuild Jerusalem and the coasts around Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple. Many said, I'm pretty happy where I am, which was a quick change. And it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear and from the hard bondage, the slavery, wherein thou wast made to serve, that thou shalt take up his proverb against the king of Babylon. There was actually a musical, satirical poem that talked about the role reversals of the captives there. How hath the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased? The Lord hath broken the staff, taken away the power of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers, taken all the Babylonian rulers away. They were literally wiped out. You know, that was what happened. When you deposed a country, you destroyed the royal family, so that there would be no later claims in terms of royal succession. And no one behind which these people could rally. That tyrant of Babylon. Babylon had smitten so many people. I look at verse 6 here, and it says, he who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. That's what happens if you treat your friends with disdain. The way that you treat people when times are good is how they're going to treat you when times get worse. There was no one who was even interested in the slightest in coming to Babylon's aid against the Persians, because they didn't have alliances. All they had were subjugated nations around them. There's an international political lesson to be learned there. If we would just take it aboard and think about it. So I'm going to mark my place right there. We'll be in Isaiah 14. We'll start at 7, where Isaiah will then look at the state of rest, or the restoring of the nation, and the joy there, when those who will repatriate Judea will do so. And we'll come to that. We'll come back to that on Sunday morning when we get together. We'll take a short break now. Are there any questions or comments before I break? If not, it's been great to hear your voices. Thank you so much for helping us with the study, and we'll be back at the top of the hour to start our service. Thank you.